And I don't want people to have to go to Israel because they're running away from America. I want them to go to Israel because they're running to Israel.
Welcome to Rebbi, I Have a Question, a podcast from Chappelle's and Midreshet Rachel V'Chaya. I'm your host, Donna Margolis, and in each episode, I sit down with Rabbi Shurin to explore one question sent in by a student or an alumna, questions about family, relationships, identity, and the lifelong journey of becoming a Torah Jew. With over 4 decades of guiding students, Rabbi Shurin brings Torah wisdom from our sages, life experience, and the teachings of his grandfather, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky Zatzal, to some of the most sensitive and personal issues we face. You may be surprised by what you hear. Let's begin. Hi, Rabbi Shurin.
Hi, Donna. How's it going?
Great. It's good to be back. A little bit of jet lag. How is your jet lag?
My jet lag is almost over. My meniscus is still going.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Right. So just so all of our listeners know, Rabbi Shurin and I just finished a whirlwind tour of the East Coast. We were all over New York, including upstate New York in Albany and New Jersey, of course, different cities in New Jersey. And we also went to Baltimore and we also went to Silver Spring, Maryland. And it was a great trip. And I think I'll speak for both of us when I say that we both got tremendous chizuk to help us keep going
Right.
and educate the current generation of students once we saw the impact that it has on them when they go back out into the world and are building families that are beautiful and really contributing to their communities. And it was just an incredible, incredible visit. We're so grateful to everybody that hosted us and everyone that came out to see. And for those of you that we didn't see, hopefully we'll continue to travel. Rabbi Shurin mentioned his meniscus. He tore his meniscus, I think, on the first day of our trip. So that was a
Right.
little upsetting, but you're feeling okay now?
I mean, it's painful, and I'm waiting for an MRI to get permission for MRI, but it's definitely workable.
Well, I wish you a refuah shlema,
Amen.
and
Thank you. It's
hopefully you'll
Yitzchak
be
ben Malka.
amen. Yitzchak ben Malka. Everyone could put in a good word so we can
Right.
get back on the road again.
Right.
Okay, so actually, today's question is directly related to our trip. I'm sure that most of our listeners can imagine that everywhere we went, again, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, and all the phone calls we had while we were there too, the same question came up over and over. People are maybe frightened. They're certainly confused. And they're really trying to make sense of a world that suddenly feels a lot less stable and less welcoming before. What do I mean? So we were there actually in New York when Zoran Mamdani was elected as the next mayor of New York. And of course, that's not the only thing. Antisemitism is rising sharply, not just on the progressive left, not just connected to Israel, but of course, now we're hearing all kinds of reports of antisemitism on the political right as well. Mamdani's election, the city with the world's greatest Jewish population outside of Israel, really shook people to the core. And we hear of incidents happening. Just last week, we heard of incidents in Passaic. We know there's graffiti and harassment and public intimidation. And of course, we all know what's happening on the college campuses. So with all of that, anti-Semitism is on the rise. And the question is, should we stay and strengthen our communities, facing it head on? Or is this the time to consider making Aliyah? I know it's a lot, but let's jump in.
Okay.
Okay. So the first question, Rabbi, is that we know that anti-Semitism is showing up in all these unexpected places across the political lines, even from people we thought were our allies in our own neighborhoods. So, can you give us a quick spiritual perspective on anti-Semitism and maybe how it explains a little bit of what we're seeing in the US, the UK, and really all around the world?
Okay, sure. So you did mention like it's surprising. So I just want to say that anti-Semitism is always surprising because it actually makes no sense. Like, we got attacked in Gaza and now they decided we're not allowed to have a state. Like and in America and in England, the Jews have been such a positive part of the population, right? It's shocking to the Jews, but you have to know that anti-Semitism arises. It's always shocking because it makes no sense. Many of our great Gedolei Torah always said this. Anti-Semitism, when the Jews are socialists, so the communists complain. When the Jews are capitalists, the socialists complain, right? And we're always to blame because they're always looking for a scapegoat. And we have, for some reason, we are the scapegoat for centuries and centuries. So I'm not surprised that I'm surprised because, as you know, myself and you, Donna, grew up in America. And I said this even once, I don't know if I'm allowed to mention this name, but I said this once to Meir Kahana. I said, you're right about a lot of things, but what you wrote about anti-Semitism in America, you're wrong. It's never going to happen here. And his answer was, let's wait. Or he said, you wait and see. That's what his language was. You wait and see.
Rabbi, you're saying that Mayor Kahana said that it would never happen in
No,
America?
I said it to Meir Kahana. I said, there's one thing I disagree with you. You're wrong about anti-Semitism in America. It's never going to happen.
Okay.
So he said, you just wait and see. That's what he said. Now, that was in 1973. Okay. So this is a lot of years since 1973. We're over 50 years. But Meir Kahana didn't say it's going to happen next year, but he said eventually it's going to happen. So I want to talk about the spiritual perspective because anti-Semitism has arisen, centuries and centuries wherever the Jews were. And the spiritual perspective is very interesting. We say it makes no sense, but from a spiritual perspective, it does actually make sense. The spiritual perspective really believes that God is in charge of anti-Semitism. It's always like this sleepy bear that's hibernating, somewhere, and it's latent in some form. But you need a certain spark for it to arise, and once it arises, it's like the bear that wakes up. It becomes very, very potent, and it really, 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 spreads. And right now that's what we're seeing. It's not anymore local; it's spreading all over the world, basically, wherever there are Jews. Right. And and according to the spiritual perspective, there's two reasons for anti-Semitism. When I say according to spiritual, I'm saying what the Meshech Chochmah said, the Netziv said, and later on Rabbi Yaakov said, and I don't believe any of them saw the other person's writings, and therefore it becomes much stronger when three people say the same thing and they didn't see each other's writing. And there's two reasons for anti-Semitism to rise spiritually, on a spiritual plane. It's assimilation, because that's what stops assimilation, is when the Jew is not anymore, the Jews disliked or hated, right? So it's harder for them to assimilate. And we actually know that after what happened on October 7th, many Jews started rethinking their assimilated views, right? They started getting more close to Jews because basically the anti-Semite says, I don't care if you're trying to assimilate. I don't want you to assimilate. You are a Jew and you're tagged as a Jew and you'll always be a Jew, right? Which was true about Germany too. Jews wanted to marry out in Germany and they did marry out. And then all of a sudden, one day, they wouldn't marry into, the Germans wouldn't marry into their families because the anti-Semitism was out. It was, was out of the bottle. But that's for the secular people who we know assimilation in America is somewhere between 70 and 80%, right? Oh. There's almost no family, and we had discussed this in previous podcasts, doesn't have a brother or sister who married out, right? So it's at the levels of assimilation and intermarriage are so great. That is always going to be in other words, on the spiritual level, is always going to be a reason why God wants to stop the anti-Semitism. He wants to make sure, he wants to stop the Jews from marrying out, from assimilating, and therefore anti-Semitism is going to rise. On the religious plane, these commentaries say getting too comfortable in diaspora, because we have built an unbelievable diaspora in the United States. In other words, the United States, and Rabbi Yaakov used to say, he has such a karsatov to America, because it's so different than him living in Europe, where the Jews in Lithuania lived for 500 years, he said to me, right? But it's so different in America, because everybody in America comes from, immigrants, and it's so many different countries, right? So to make your home in America was very, very easy, Rabbi Yaakov felt. But it has another side to it. Rabbi Yaakov says, we're getting very comfortable. This he said in 1977 at an Aguda convention. We're getting too comfortable in America. And there's where getting too comfortable means, what does that mean? It means building yeshivas, building yeshuls, building communities. OU kosher food is in, I think it reached 1 million products already. Okay. When I was growing up, it was about a few hundred. Okay. And it's reached 1 million. In other words, we basically built a frum society that we can live beautifully, beautiful homes, and also, eat just about everything in the kosher world, has something that's in the non-kosher world, but now it's kosher, right? Nabisco was completely treif, now it's completely kosher. All these things make us much more comfortable being Jews, and I can't blame us. We want to be comfortable if we're living somewhere. And through the last 60, 70 years, we've managed to create a yeshiva in Lakewood that has 7,000 students. That's no small task. In Europe, we didn't have a yeshiva even close to that. Okay. So Rabbi Yaakov said, I'm warning you, if you get too comfortable, the non-Jew has to make you uncomfortable. And that's the other reason right now. So both those things are happening. Nobody could deny that the secular world was assimilating and intermarrying. And no one could deny that we got too comfortable in America, and we don't feel anymore like we're in diaspora. We feel like we're at home. Oh, that Rabbi Yaakov said, God doesn't let that. So that's really the spiritual side of anti-Semitism.
Can I just clarify
yeah, sure.
one thing?
Go ahead.
I think you said it at the end, but many of the things that you described about being too comfortable, though, as you said, those are all good things. Meaning,
Right.
anywhere we live, the fact that we're pouring our resources into building yeshivas and shuls and eating kosher food, that's what we should be doing wherever we live somewhere. So
Correct.
could you just, in one sentence, isolate what the problem with it is?
The problem is, Rabbi Yaakov certainly held, and I think all people held, is that no matter how long and how comfortable you are in Golut, it could be comfortable as far as spiritual things, right? You're not allowed to forget that you're in the diaspora and that Israel is your home.
Okay.
Okay. Now, in Eastern Europe, I just want to add, we didn't have a home in Israel, but you could still think Israel is my home whenever it comes, right? The minute you forget that, God is going to remind you that you are a foreigner here. Okay? That's what you're going to be reminded.
Okay, thank you. That was a great clarification. Are you ready to move on to the next question?
Sure, good. Go for it.
Okay. So the next question is of course related, that in order to keep up what we've just discussed with all of the things that we've built, our institutions, we today are very afraid, right? People are actually afraid to send their kids to Jewish schools, to go out,
Yes.
or have their kids go out with yarmulkes on. I don't think that there was a shul that we visited in the entire time that we were in America, certainly on Shabbat, that didn't have security guards standing outside. And I'll share with you that even when I was in LA after you came back to Israel,
Right.
I went to a kosher restaurant and they had security outside the kosher restaurant full time. Okay.
Hmm.
So, and then of course we know that even outside of the Orthodox world, there's tremendous resources being poured into fighting anti-Semitism. Uh,
Correct.
Online and in our federations and local communities, there's huge efforts being made politically to fight against anti-Semitism. So I
Right.
know this is a big question, but do you actually think that these efforts, should we be responding this way, or how do we know where to focus our energy and our effort?
Right. Look, I feel that we have to, I think the Jewish communities all over the world, especially in the larger Jewish communities, I think it is correct for them to respond and even pour money into it, because what I'm afraid of is that, it's really, anti-Semitism is really taking off. And if no one does anything to stop it, which means pouring in money and speakers and so on and so forth and writing about it, it can get out of hand. The threat is very real today. It's not like, when I was growing up, an incident here and there, but nobody really took it very seriously. Today, you see what's happening, like, people who you never thought would be anti-Semitic, like you said at the beginning, we never thought there'd be college students who know nothing about the Jewish people would just automatically arise and take for like a simple approach of the Jews are terrible people and we have to get rid of them. We have to get rid of the state of Israel, right? So it's a very serious threat. And if you're living in the diaspora, you got to do something. If you're not coming to Israel, right, which that we have to still talk about, but if you're not coming to Israel, then you have to fight anti-Semitism as much as you can, though I can't guarantee anyone it's going to work, right? Because since it's illogical and we usually fight things with logic, right? It doesn't respond very well. When someone's illogical, he doesn't respond very well to logic, right? So I'm really hoping in a sense that it works. I know big Zionists feel, wow, this is our opportunity to get everybody to come to Israel. I'm not that big of a Zionist. I think, the Jews have a right to live in diaspora, but they certainly can't feel comfortable there now, that's exactly what Rabbi Yaakov was talking about. You're not going to be comfortable whether you like it or not, right? So you could, feel that, we have our yeshivas, we have our shuls, we have our world of kashrus and, beautiful mikvos, right? But we're not going to be comfortable because we're wearing that baseball cap, which I have to tell you, in Israel, we don't wear baseball caps.
Mhm.
Okay, we can talk more about that. But in America, when I went to England, you remember, Donna, when I went to England for that Shabbat, right? I wrote a number of English people whether I need to take along my baseball cap. And there were some that said no, but there were some that said yes.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's a big change. No one ever said that to me 5-6 years ago.
Mhm.
So there's a real threat here. There's a real threat, and we have to put money into trying to, if nothing more than just stop it from spreading.
Mhm. Okay, so with that, though, I think it is probably time to jump into the $1 million question, right? And this is
Right.
really, I'm sure, what most of our those are the old days, our listeners today, I think that this is really what people want to know the rabbi's advice on. Okay, so we heard it certainly when we were in America, that many rabbis are advising people to invest in strengthening communities. Um, because what are they supposed to tell their people, right? They're going to tell them to be strong and to be united and to fight against anti-Semitism. But many, and especially in our alumni community, many people are asking about Aliyah and see it as a better long-term option. So, Rabbi, at this point, would
Right.
you advise that this is the time to start making plans to move to Israel? And what practical factors should be guiding this decision?
Right. I think it's a great question. And it's such a great question because I think, like you said, a lot of our alumni is certainly thinking about that, and they have actually told me and you that they're thinking about it. Some of them have taken the move already, recently. I would say in the from birth community, it's a little bit less, but I definitely see the from community thinking about this. They really are thinking about it. Some of them are thinking about Texas and Florida, which, by the way, tells you already something that's unprecedented, because having to move out of New York, or feeling that I have to move out of New York because Islam, radical Islam, has taken over New York officially, right? It's already in, in Gracie Manor, so to speak. It's already in New York City as the mayor, right? And I just recently heard an interview with the mayor, on YouTube, like a few days ago. It was pashut scary what he was saying. He was talking about how the Jews are killing Arabs, in Gaza, and he was still, that line, and taking, committing, what do they call it? Committing genocide in Gaza, right? This is stuff that never came out of a mayor of New York's mouth before. So, the fact that people are already moving out of New York, that tells you anti-Semitism is very successful now. Okay. And then if you're already moving, let's at least in the back of our minds have Israel as part of the equation. And again, I understand that, to move to Israel, and thank God people have the time to think about it. When the Shah fell in Iran and Khomeini took over, there was no time to think about it. Okay. So I think it's very good that we're discussing this, because I want the people to think about it. And there's a lot of different aspects that you have to think about, right? Once, Kristallnacht, Chas v'Sholom, takes place in America, there's no more time to think. You just got to go. And I don't want people to have to go to Israel because they're running away from America. I want them to go to Israel because they're running to Israel, right? And that means you do have to take into account, how old your kids are, how easy it's going to be as far as my children are concerned. They have good friends, right? And, how I make a living in Israel. I'm working here. Can I transfer what I have to Israel? Could I have to do something else in Israel? How do I deal with my family in Chutz La'aretz? Like we have a lot of family in Chul, right? The person's personal finances. It's not easy to live in Israel, right? It's I wouldn't say, there's certain things, there are perks like, insurance in Israel is very cheap relatively, and also school is cheap relatively. So there are perks, but there's also buying an apartment in Israel, which is quite expensive today. So
can I just pause
yeah,
you for a second? Maybe we could talk about the challenges in a minute. But I really want to go back and just like zone in on what you said about the timing of Aliyah. Can you give our listeners a clear answer? Should they be thinking about Aliyah?
The answer is yes, they should be thinking about it, right? Certainly on in the back of their minds, very much, I wouldn't say back in their minds, but not all the way in the back of your mind anymore, right? More up front. They should definitely be thinking about it. When you say thinking about it, right, what does that mean, right? I should, number one, be thinking that this could get out of hand. In other words, what we have in America could get out of hand. And I don't want to be caught desperate, okay? That I just got to pack my bags and go and leave my house. Right? We don't want that to happen, which did happen in Germany. It happened in other countries. Right now, as I said at the beginning, I thought it could never happen in America, but it is happening. And I don't want anyone to wait till, I'm going to call it's too late. But in Eastern Europe and in Western Europe, it was too late because you didn't have where to go. Baruch Hashem, the people have where to go. Right? We have Eretz Yisrael. And that alone makes you feel a lot safer because I have a place where to go, right? But in that sense, they should be thinking about it. Correct, 100%.
So do you think we're at that definitive moment?
That's what I meant when I said there was actually a very not just there was a change, a very serious change that's unprecedented, that Jews are talking about leaving New York, right? That wasn't even on the agenda even 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's a precedent taking place here that makes me begin to think that anti-Semitism is becoming very successful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you can run to Texas and you can run to Florida, right? Okay, we have that advantage in America. But once you're running, isn't Israel on the map as well? Since at the end of the day, right, Israel is our country. We feel proud in Israel. We feel idealistic in Israel. By the way, even the Haredi community feels they belong in Eretz Yisrael.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're not ready to give it over to the Arabs because they're not Zionists. You know, that has nothing, Zionists have nothing to do with this. Every Israeli Haredi guy, when an Arab says to him, this is not your country, he has a very quick and strong answer. It is my country. And it's not your country, right? He really believes that, the Haredi guy. So the people in Israel are proud. They're idealistic, right, about their country, right? And the people in America are not proud about their country. They're scared. They don't know what's going to happen next, right? So I think Aliyah has to definitely be, pushed from the back of the mind to more to the front of the mind.
Okay. Okay, so now you did start to discuss some of the challenges of living in Israel.
Correct.
I think that if we had a lot more time, we could probably carry on about all of the positive things about living here, some of which you mentioned. And they are worth mentioning because things in Israel have certainly changed, in the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years, etc.
Sure.
Meaning the more olim that come from outside of Israel bring with them positive things from their communities, and it has a positive impact on life in Israel. So I think that for at least those of us that were students in the schools, more than 20 years ago, I think life in Israel today is very different than it was back then. There's also a lot of technology that has technology and other progress that has helped to take Israel into the current century and
Correct.
and
Correct.
made it much easier for people to adapt and to integrate. But nevertheless, there are still challenges, right?
Right.
Like you said, people don't want to leave family behind. They worry about making a living. They fear that living in Israel is hard on kids, that it's expensive, and also that the country is, no lie, religiously polarized. And also, frankly, one could argue that living in Israel is also unsafe, right?
Okay.
So,
It's
okay, how do
important.
these challenges fit into making the decision?
Okay. So first of all, I want to tell you, I spoke to a statistician about this question because I think it's a great question. I think the question of, is Israel any safer than America, right? So I have to begin by saying that statistically, the statistician said to me that it is safer to live in Israel. It's not safer necessarily to live amongst the Arabs in Israel. Everything is relative, just like it's not very safe to live, in Harlem, right? Maybe it's a little safer today, but in certain areas in Harlem or where I come from, Brownsville, it's not very safe to live there, right? But someone can be quite safe. You ask me, is it safer to live in Ramat Beit Shemesh than New York today? Yes, it is. There's no question about it, right? It was even safer to live in the Golan Heights during the war with Iran, right? How many people were killed in the Golan Heights? None, right? And they were getting missiles and stuff. Okay, so it was scary, but people, no one was killed. Maybe a few people were injured. The army took some losses because of it, but lo aleinu, but that's what the army is there for. That's why we feel protected, because we have an army, right? And that we don't have in America. We have to sort of fend for ourselves, but we don't have an Israeli army. And on that note, because you mentioned polarization, I want to give a context to polarization. Yes, there's definitely polarization, and it needs to be worked on between the ultra-Orthodox, the modern Orthodox, between the ultra-Orthodox and the secular, between the modern Orthodox and the secular left wing, right? There is a lot of polarization. Everyone is veering for a little bit more power, right? Let me just say that the more Americans that come, the less polarization there's going to be, because American Jews, whether they're religious or secular, are not polarized. They're practical, they're posed, and they appreciate when they come to Israel seeing another Jew. They couldn't care less if he's wearing a kippah or not. You know, some Haredi people in Israel feel that way. They don't want to see secular Jews, but no religious Jew in America, even from Lakewood, says, I don't want to see, secular Jews. It's not like that. They bring a certain balance to the state of Israel. That's number one. Two, I want to tell you that something that maybe I assume the Americans have heard, but maybe they haven't heard. Get a Haredi guy in the Israeli army and a secular guy fighting next to each other. They are hugging each other. There's absolutely no difference as far as they're concerned. This guy is davening and this guy's reading some secular novel, right? They are fighting for the same thing and they feel together. They respect each other. They feel together. When we talk about polarization, I want the people all over the world who are listening to this to understand it's political. It's in the world of politics. It's not one Jew to another. When I see a secular soldier, right, I want to hug him. There's no two ways about it. I want to hug the guy. And half the time you see now secular soldiers, we saw secular with tzitzis on, right? How many secular soldiers we see? I saw a guy with, an earring and a ponytail, and he was wearing his tzitzis, right? So that's really, the message there is really, I understand the religious people. I'm not, but I understand where they're coming from. I want to be a little bit part of that, right? And, the hostages that came back, they were beyond political, animals there. They were just Jews. That's what they felt like. Guys who never made Kiddush in their life made Kiddush on water, right? Or they pretended to make Kiddush, right? So we have to look at the people of Israel, and I feel the vast majority of Israel are not polarized. They respect each other. And we shouldn't get the wrong idea because, now the Haredi people are, protesting and they're saying they declared war on yeshivas, right? I think that has to be dealt with. I'm not trying to say there's nothing that has to be dealt with. But a lot of times in the political world, you blow things out of proportion, right? So that Medina Yisrael has declaring war on yeshivas. Believe me, that's a little bit out of proportion, right? They need soldiers. That's true. We need soldiers, right? And we need guys learning yeshiva. That's also true. We have to come to a balance. We have to come to a pshara here. And I think we will eventually, because we need good Haredi soldiers in the Israeli army. We need them. We need good soldiers in general. So we definitely need them. And by the way, the Haredi guys are excellent soldiers as well. Why? Because not just physically, because they have the ideal that this is our country, and we're being threatened with our existential threat is here. So we have to understand that it's not it's not what the headlines say.
Mm-hmm. So, okay, so let's just try to go back. So you're saying the polarization is not all as bad as what
right, exactly.
Okay, so that's good. And the safety issue, maybe people should choose, if safety is a concern, which it might be to a lot of people, that they could pick their places in Israel based on that factor. But it
many places, by the way, many places.
Doesn't rule out living in Israel. And then in terms of the challenges with the kids and the finances, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but obviously those are things that people need to think very seriously about and plan wisely for. So what are some things that people could do to plan ahead, let's just say?
Well, again, they can find out through Nefesh B'Nefesh, or everybody has friends in Israel who are going through things which they're going to have to be going through as well. So I always say, it's best to speak to the people who made the mistakes already, right?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
and get some knowledge from them, whether it's about parnasa, whether it's about their kids, where to live, right? How much finances you actually need to live in Israel, depending
Yeah.
where you live, right?
Yeah.
These are things that you have to do. That's what I was saying before. If Israel's in the forefront of your mind, you'll do that research, take the notes. I and you and many other people from Dar Chinom have received phone calls from alumni with these questions. And
Sure.
we work through the questions. I do research for them on high schools. I do research for them on the job market, right? Because let's say I know somebody in high tech. I know it's, for instance, Nefesh Nefesh can tell you about high tech for sure. But if I know people in the field, I'm going to go to them privately and ask them. I say, look, I have a student that's in this field. What do you think? And I think that's the research we have to do. And that it should always be in the front of their mind when they meet someone from Israel, talk to them about it. In other words, I didn't think that till the last 2 years. You always have time. I'm nervous that they may not have time. And therefore, right now is the time when to do that, because you still have some time, right? Again, I'm not predicting that they're going to have to leave America. I'm not a prophet. I'm not predicting that. But I am saying that I'm nervous about it. I never was before.
Okay. Well, I'll throw in a couple of things there. I just want everybody,
Go for it.
all of our listeners should know that at Midreshet Rachel, we actually have an Aliyah program, which gives support to students that have or are thinking about making Aliyah. So that's something to just reach out about if you're interested in learning more about that. And then, yes, as Rabbi Shurin mentioned, many of us on the staff are in touch with alumni all the time. That have questions and want help and need resources in their decision-making process about Aliyah, and we're happy to be there for you. So just keep that in mind.
By the way, Donna, how to deal with family, especially in the Baal Tshuva world. In the religious world, I always say, just tell your parents they got to make Aliyah too. In the secular world, parents have a much harder time with that. And I do feel that the parents should not be ignored. I feel that you have to go on WhatsApp with them, put the kids on WhatsApp with them, try to bring them to Israel, right, as much as possible. We do know even students that brought their secular parents to Israel, right?
Sure.
They did. It does happen. Parents got older and they needed their kids, and the kids brought them to Israel. And I want you to tell you that the parents are not complaining. They're doing very well.
True. Maybe one time, I think we have an episode coming up that deals with issues of Kibbud Av V'Em, and maybe we could include a conversation
that would be great.
About Aliyah vis-a-vis that mitzvah.
Correct. That's a great point. Great point.
Okay, good. Okay, so we have about 2 minutes left, and I just want to ask you, Rabbi, what do you think your grandfather would say today?
Look, my grandfather was not a Zionist, so that's good in a sense, because he was coming not from an idealistic reason to live in Israel. It was coming more from, in a sense, a practical reason. But Rabbi Yaakov came obviously from a frum reason or a spiritual side. When I made the Aliyah and I asked him, I told him I got a job teaching in Chappelle's, he said to me, it seems that you have a schus to live in Israel. So it's obvious that Rabbi Yaakov held that, it is a schut to live in Israel. It's meritorious that God allowed us to live in Israel and that you have the opportunity to live in Israel. He felt that that's a schut. Ramosha Feinstein felt even though it's not obligatory, which maybe today doesn't even matter anymore, you're makayim a mitzvah by living in Israel. So that in itself, from these more Haredi stands is very important to take into account. But Rabbi Yaakov did feel that eventually we're all going to have to come. He used to say that. Well, eventually we're all going to have to come. It's just a question of when, right? And why, right? So Rabbi Yaakov felt that if a person can make it to Israel, of course they should, because we're all, people who always say, I'm going to sit in America till till Mashiach comes. Rabbi Yaakov didn't hold that way. Mm-hmm. He didn't hold you should just forget about Israel because you're having a good time in America. To the contrary, he felt having too good of a time in America is problematic. Mm-hmm. He felt that it should always be on our mind because obviously we have something we didn't have for the last 2,000 years. Mm-hmm. No one can deny that. It's good. It's not so good. It's got problems. Yes. Everywhere has problems. There's nowhere exactly safe for a Jew today. But relatively, I would rather live in a place like, I think Rabbi Yaakov would feel this. He once said to me, you see the houses in Mattersdorf? Because I was sitting in Mattersdorf with him. He said, see the house? That's going to be the houses that are going to be there when Mashiach comes. Mm-hmm. In other words, we're not expecting them to be destroyed and then again rebuilt. He said, those are the houses that be when Mashiach comes.
Wow.
Right? So obviously, Rabbi Yaakov felt that if a person could, he should make Aliyah and not sit in Chutz La'aretz and say, well, when Mashiach knocks on my door, I'm going to walk the walk. I always say to the people, if you wait for Mashiach comes, you won't be able to sell your house because all the non-Jews know that Mashiach came, right? And they'll say, you got to go to Israel. So instead of paying you $2 million, I'll pay you $200,000 for your house. So you better get ahead of time because housing in Israel is going to go up. Housing in America is going to go down.
Okay, Rabbi, thank you so much for your thoughtful and grounded perspective, especially during this time when everybody wants to know the answers to these questions.
Sure.
I'll take this moment to make one last announcement, and that is that I would like all of our listeners to consider supporting our work at Chappelle's and Midreshet Rachel V'Chaya as we come to the end of the tax year 2025. You all know that your support helps us continue to make Torah accessible to our community and, most important, to educate this generation of students who have made the heroic decision to come to learn in Israel, dafka at a time when the world is pushing against it.
I second that.
Thanks, Rabbi. Their commitment is remarkable, and we couldn't do this without you. So please visit www.darchenoam.org/donate or look for the link in the show notes to make your donation. If you have a question for a future episode and you want to send it our way, you can email us at questions@darchenoam.org. That's questions@darchenoam.org. Rebbi, I Have a Question is a podcast from Chappelle's and Midreshet Rachel V'Chaya. See you next time.
Take care, guys.